Welcome everyone to Monday Match Analysis. I'm Gill Gross. It is the 2026 ATP Top 10 Prediction Show. Big one. A tough one for me to do. I know I say that every year. So far, I haven't completely embarrassed myself, but that is always the fear coming in. Now, in the past, I've started this episode by looking back at last year, but I've already done that. There's a video out. It's called Top 10 Prediction Audit. So if you're curious how I did last year, check that out. This show is just going to be the top 10 prediction. So it'll be a little bit shorter than usual because these used to get long. Before I go any further, I want to dedicate this episode to Damian Kust. Absolutely heartbreaking news yesterday that Damian passed away at 26 years old after a sudden illness. And for those who don't know, he represented the very, very best of us. And when I say us, I'm talking about lovers of tennis, fans of tennis, and yes, tennis media. He dedicated himself to spotlighting the ATP Challenger Tour in particular and did such an outstanding job. Intellect, enthusiasm, hard work, a good-natured spirit. I mean, anything that you would want somebody to be covering this sport, Damian Kust was. And he will not be replaceable. He simply will not. I would just say that the legacy he leaves behind is a bar of excellence that we can all just strive to achieve. We probably won't get there, but we can try, and we are all better for that. So rest in peace to Damian Kust. And again, he is in my thoughts as I record this episode today. All right. Not easy to just continue doing the show like normal after that. But a couple of things I want to get into just before I start with the honorable mentions, and then I'll go from 10 all the way up to 1. First off, on the lateness of this, won't get into the reasons why, partially computer issues, but no matter what, the season has already started and there has been results, and I want to address that as well. And just say that if you are changing your opinion in any kind of dramatic way after one or two matches at the very beginning of the season, that's not a smart thing to do. So ideally, I would have done this before we got any results in. Couldn't do it. I would just say that nothing really changed here. And that's by design. Because if a lot changed, that would be called overreacting. Keep in mind, I always have to say this, that defending points here does not matter. It may matter for how a player is going to be seeded throughout the year, and I may mention defending points a couple of times as I do this show, as it pertains to seeding. But when it's all said and done, at the end of 2026, what players did in 2025 is not going to have any bearing. And I'm just getting ahead of this because I'm always reading comments that say, so-and-so is defending a lot of points, so it's going to be hard for them. And it's like, no, that makes no sense. Defending points is irrelevant. Always have to say that. Now, what is the state of the ATP Tour right now? It's an interesting one because in the last 2 years at least, and maybe I could even extend this to 3 years, the last 2 years, I have sat down to do this activity and predict my year-end top 10, and I have felt as if not a lot is going to change because it's been a young top 10. It's been a very young top 10, and there were times where it felt like those on the outside looking in were not as young, on the decline. And I think the last 2 or 3 years, yeah, it's been like a lot of 23-year-olds, 24, 25, occupying the top 10, and then Novak Djokovic. But it's like you don't see players declining. I think we're getting to the point now where the landscape looks a lot different to me. You have players on the inside who may well be declining at this time. And there are players on the outside who are in ascendancy right now. So there's going to be more movement in 2026, I believe. Remember, the big three are not normal people. They're the aliens among the aliens. When a player is 29 years old, 30 years old, they may begin to deteriorate in certain ways, and you may see that fleshed out in results. The big three are not normal people. Always need to remember that. Last thing I'll say, it's tight. Look at the rankings right now. Now, again, the rankings right now are not going to mean anything for what the rankings look like at the end of the year, but it is still an illustration of just how close world number 18 is to world number 6. It just feels closer than normal. From 10 to 22, only 1,000 points. From 9 to 4, only 1,000 points. It's going to be interesting. All right, without further ado, honorable mentions. These are players who I believe deserve to be discussed because it's debatable. They deserve to be discussed because they are worthy of consideration. But these are all players who I am not placing in my top 10 for my year-end prediction. I'm going to start with Alexander Bublik. Now, I will talk about defending points when it comes to Bublik, because all of his points are backloaded. He was not good in the first 3 months of 2025, and he's currently at 11 in the world. So if you look at where he's at, he's basically guaranteed in the first couple months, unless he doesn't win any matches at all, to get into the top 10 at some point within the first couple months of next season. Important to keep in mind. He's going to get there, which is a great accomplishment and very well deserved. I don't think he'll stay there for the whole year, because even Bublik at his best has some limiting factors: a second serve that's fragile, a forehand that goes in and out, commitment on return and defense that remains a little bit inconsistent. I don't think he's quite well-rounded enough a player to finish the year in the top 10, but I do think he'll stay in the top 20. And if you look at the landscape of Bublik's career in its entirety, that in itself is a great accomplishment. To go back-to-back top 20 is something that he's never done. He is an elite first serve with terrific racket skills, the ability to make balls in rally. I do think with a renewed sense of focus and competitive spirit that I think Sasha has a chance to maintain, and I expect him to maintain. He can stabilize in the top 20 in my estimation, but I don't have him top 10. I also want to give a shout out to Arthur Fils. Some may be surprised that I'm even giving him an honorable mention, but I'm doing so because there was a point last year where I anticipated that I would be predicting Fils to finish top 10 in 2026. I felt like when I looked at his trajectory and his rate of improvement, that's where we were headed. I'm using the past tense because I don't feel that way any longer, and I feel as if this back injury, which will even keep him out of the Australian Open. So we're going on, I believe, 7 or 8 months on the bench, on the shelf for Fils. That will delay his development. And, you know, his problem has been keeping the ball in, which is born out of, I think, a lot of different aspects in his game. I mean, some of it is shot selection and risk management. Some of it is just a product of how hard he naturally cuts at the ball on each and every swing. But, you know, he needs matches in order to learn how to sort of harness his tools and his weapons. And he hasn't been able to get those matches. I love the raw ingredients. He's incredibly explosive, but I think now with the injury in mind, he needs more time. Honorable mention, and I'm going to group 2 players together here: Stefanos Tsitsipas and Andrey Rublev. They are technically both still in their primes. Tsitsipas is 27. Rublev is 28. They are technically still towards maybe the second half of their primes, but in their primes. They were both perennial top 10 finishers for 4+ years, both of them, and I still believe in their skill sets. You might say, oh, Rublev's one-dimensional, he only has one speed. Or Tsitsipas has a terrible backhand return, can't protect his backhand, can't defend on his backhand. And that stuff, I'm not going to fight you on that stuff. But if you then say, well, that's why they can't be top 10, I'd say, well, what the heck happened in 2022 then? Explain 2022 and 2021 and 2023 and 2020. Explain what happened there. I still believe if Tsitsipas or Rublev can get to that level of play again, they're going to be top 10 players. Maybe not as high as they once were, right? Maybe a little lower, but I think they're going to be top 10 players. It's the fact that the reason they're not in my top 10, it's been over 2 years for both of them since I felt any sustained positive momentum. Yeah, there were a couple of events for Rublev that looked good last year, but there was no sustained momentum. Same thing for Tsitsipas, really going back to the Australian Open in 2024, really, since I felt great about the direction of Tsitsipas. It's a long time, over 2 years for both of them. I just no longer trust aspects of their physicality and their mentality. That's why I leave them out. But I wouldn't rule out like a Dimitrov-like resurgence, especially for Tsitsipas, who I still think athletically is a little more dynamic. Honorable mention to, and this is where it starts to get even tougher, I think. Honorable mention to Felix Auger-Aliassime. I'm leaving him out of my top 10. I take nothing away from the level of play that he displayed in the last 3 months of 2025. He got everything humming. His serve, which is a beast. His forehand, it's a monster of a shot. His movement looked outstanding, as good as I've ever seen it. And his backhand, which can shoot him in the foot sometimes, it got really, really solid. I do think he's made improvements since the last time we saw him break into the top 10, which would have been 2022. I think, just to name one example, I think this is the most significant. His second serve, way better than it was in 2022. There are aspects of his game that I think suggest that he could sustain himself a bit better than he did back then. But ultimately, the body throughout Auger-Aliassime's career has been inconsistent. The confidence can be fragile. The game is low margin. I've never seen him maintain his best level for even a 6-month stretch. Ever. So to say he's going to play top 10 ball for the entirety of 2026, that's just not really who I know him to be. The best counter argument is, well, Gill, he doesn't have to sustain top 10 tennis. Look at what happened last year where he just caught fire for 3 months at the end of the year. Sure, maybe. It's just, to me, it's not a formula that I want to rely on as far as making a prediction goes. So yeah, I can't get him in. Didn't get him in. I'd also like to give an honorable mention to Flavio Cobolli. I'm chickening out. Honestly, that's what it comes down to. I'm chickening out because I'm very tempted to make him my bold top 10 pick. I've wanted to for a long time. If there's somebody, like if I'm asked, who do you think is underlooked right now as a top 10 prospect? And I've said this in mailbags throughout the year or throughout last year. He's the guy because I love his athleticism and I love his forehand. And I still think those are the two most important things. I also think he doesn't have a glaring weakness that really gives me huge pause on him. Like if his backhand was terrible, for example, I might say, okay, well, that's going to be an issue, but it's not. So, I look at the best players in the world. They are usually the best forehands and the best movers, right? I think elite forehands, elite movers, that's the most proven formula and the easiest path to the top. I think Cobolli kind of has that, and that's why I'm very tempted. I'm very tempted to just make a bold pick on him. But there's not a ton to go off of results-wise. His serve and his shot selection are still questionable areas. And to me, the top 10 felt too competitive this year. If I were like scratching for 10 and I'm like, oh, I feel like there's not 10 names, I'd happily put Cobolli in there. That's not how I felt doing this activity. It's not how I usually feel, to be honest with you, but it's not how I felt doing this activity. I felt as if there were 13 guys who I wanted to put in, and I could only put in 10. All right, moving on. I'd like to give an honorable mention to Alex de Minaur. After back-to-back years making the ATP finals, last year I took a stand on Demon when many would have argued that he was a fluky top 10 finisher back in 2024. I said, you know what? I back his character. I back his drive. I back his toughness. I think he's going to do it again. I was right. I was happy with that pick. But I'm not going to run it back. I don't think a human, even him, can keep it up for that long when it's that difficult, when it's that hard, when the work rate has to be that high. I mean, you can look at examples of players pulling it off, I think, in the past, but to me, he's David Ferrer is one of them. Like, he had decent longevity at his peak level, but I think it's very, very hard. Diego Schwartzman didn't quite have it. Leighton Hewitt had kind of a shorter peak. I think de Minaur, he's a Hewitt type. I'm not saying the peaks were not as high as Hewitt. I'm not making an apples to apples comparison, but I hope that my message is kind of understood when I just say, I think when the formula is as difficult as it is for Demon, the years at your best, at your very best tennis, those years are limited, more limited. And I think de Minaur declines in 2026 if I'm reading the tea leaves. My final honorable mention is Daniil Medvedev. Serve got better last year, but he probably had his worst year as a baseliner. He turns 30 years old soon. I think he has lost some legs. And there are going to be moments where it looks like he's making up for it with his offense. But I never think that's going to be sustainable. I think the technique and the fact that he's not comfortable with his forecourt game and perhaps how he's built physically, I think all of these things create a player who is not going to be able to adapt into first strike tennis very easily. He's going to need to be able to dig in and play physical. And what I saw last year that was so concerning was a lack of willingness to play that way. So between a lack of willingness to play that way as a 6'6" guy turns 30, plus the fact that I don't really back him to be able to fully evolve in his play style, it makes it so that I don't really get behind him fully. Now, the confidence is clearly back at the start of the year, and the confidence was better at the tail end of last year. I've already talked about his fall season. While it is true that he started to win more consistently, if you look at the level of competition and if you sort of place the level of expectation closer to a prime Medvedev level, it starts to feel less impressive when you look at it from a distance. Whereas in the moment, it was like, oh, Medvedev's kind of showing us something here. I think with more distance, it's like, okay, it was a good fall, but it wasn't really enough for me to change my mind about where he's going long term. And I don't think he's going up. Now, I still think he's a great competitor who does some things at the very highest level still. If you look at the consistency of his backhand, if you look at how many returns he makes in play, if you look at the disruptiveness of his rally ball, how difficult to attack it is, perhaps still his defense out of the backhand corner. He does a lot of things at a very high level still. I don't think he's going to fall off of a cliff or anything, which is why he's my last honorable mention. He's my world number 11. I thought about putting him back in, but I couldn't quite do it. And with that, let's get into the top 10. Coming in at world number 10 is Casper Ruud. Casper has proven over the years to be a borderline top 10 player, meaning some years he's in, some years he's out. Here's why I think 2026 is going to be an in year for Ruud. I want to start here. I like the racket switch. I like him going to the smaller head size. It makes sense to me. There are not a lot of male players who have that kind of strength, that kind of racket speed, who are best served with an 100 square inch racket where you're going to struggle a little bit for precision. I think going to the smaller head, getting some accuracy will hopefully embolden him to make the forehand an even more, it's always been a big weapon as far as weight of shot, but can he add a little bit of precision there? Maybe, especially because the results in the fall, considering it's his least favorite time of year, after making the switch, which was post-US Open, by the way, were pretty positive. Pretty positive. Maybe his best indoor fall hardcourt season ever. Didn't get to play in the ATP finals, of course, because that was a lost cause. It was too late. But still, probably his best indoor fall ever. I also think at this point in his career, he has fully bought into the aggressive mentality. I think it was pretty commonplace throughout 2022, and especially, scratch that, throughout 2023, especially, which was a tough year for Ruud. He'd get needlessly passive on a regular basis. And I do think he's flushed that out of his system. He's bought into the fact that his forehand needs to be the biggest weapon on the court in order for him to have success. And it's been a long process for Ruud to get to the point where he's always in that mindset, but I do feel as if he's finally there. I like the overall trend of his backhand. He has continuously challenged himself to figure out ways to take the backhand down the line with more frequency and figure out how to lower the trajectory of that backhand and increase the speed of that backhand when the situation calls for it, which I think is great. Now, you may ask me, well, if he's improved so much, why did he miss the top 10 last year? And I would say, well, he had a terribly timed knee issue, which was not only an impediment to him having any sort of run at Roland Garros when he fell in the second round to Nuno Borges, but was actually lingering throughout clay court season. It clearly sort of was good enough for him to have success in Madrid, but was still something that bothered him throughout the clay court season, which is, of course, the time of year where he wants to rack up as many points as possible. I would point out that last year, his win rate was better than the year before. The big difference was he didn't have that Roland Garros semifinal run. That was the difference. If you're looking at guys who I've placed Ruud above, if I'm comparing them back to back, I trust Casper's body more than I trust Medvedev's at this stage. I think he ends up with more explosive runs than Minaur because his best tennis is more imposing. I think he has the chance to have a bit of a better hardcourt season than he did last year, but I expect the clay court results, assuming he's healthy, to go back to what we're used to seeing, better than it was in 2025. Moving on to number 9, it's going to be Joao Fonseca. Most listening will know that I've been high on Fonseca from the start. He projects to have a tier 1 forehand, a forehand that will be one of the scariest weapons on the tour, a backhand that you still have to worry about, meaning you can't just play keep away on the forehand and expect to be safe. He will hurt you off the other wing. The serve weapon building has been rapid. I am pleasantly surprised by how quickly the serve has been beefed up. His continental skills are decent. He competes hard. He plays with energy. Now, physically, he's got a lot of work to do. That is typical when you go from 18 years old to 19 years old to 20 years old on tour, and that's the phase that Fonseca is currently in. Often physical work is needed and necessary. And for Joao, it is. You know, not everybody is Alcaraz and Nadal, who at 18 years old are already dominant forces by ATP standards. So I expect that there's going to be a lot of progress physically. If Fonseca were 22 or 23, and this is kind of the level of footwork and quickness around the court that we were looking at, it'd be a totally different conversation. But no, I project that Joao takes a big leap physically in 2026. So that's what I like about him. That's what I expect. What about the evidence? Like, what about the hard results? I think that's there too. That's satisfactory for me to make this call, because finishing 24 in the world upon your first full year at tour level puts him on par with most of the greats. If you look at, I'm not going to go over the specifics again. I have many times, but look at Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic, and Sinner, and Alcaraz, and look at what they did in their first full years on tour, and Fonseca is right in the range where you want to be. Winning 2 175s, 1 250, 1 500, that is an amazing title haul at 18 years old. So he passes the eye test for me, and he passes the results test for me as well up to this point. Fonseca at 9. At world number 8, here's where I'm going to go with Ben Shelton, who I think continues to be at least one of the most interesting players to discuss, because there is such a range of opinions on Shelton and where he may finish at the end of 2026. Almost every aspect of Shelton's game, I believe there are gains available. His strengths, his serve, his forehand, his weaknesses, his return, his movement, his backhand. Like, I think the strengths and the weaknesses, when I look at kind of where he's at, I think all of them can get better. And he's ambitious, and he's got good people around him, and he's already really good. So long term, I'm pro Shelton, high on Shelton. Think he projects to be top 5 long term, and I think he can do some big, big things. But as far as 2026 is concerned, I'm going to kind of tap the brakes a little bit. I see, first off, some seeding danger for Ben. He's 9 in the world right now, defending Australian Open semifinals, Indian Wells quarterfinals, then Miami first round, but then clay, where he still struggled to kind of find his footing. The only reason I bring that up is because if Australia doesn't go well, especially if it goes badly, Ben might be dealing with tough draws for a while. Ben might have some difficult draws throughout the first, 7-8 months of the season before his before he maybe stabilizes. So that's something to keep in mind. The break rate last year, 16.6%. That was his rate of breaking serve. That is still very low for a top 10 player. Now, can he make up for it with hold rate? He's still tough for most players to break. That is absolutely true. I just feel against higher end competition, the serve doesn't quite get him there on its own. In other words, he's not at the level of serving where he's getting a ton of cheap points against the best returners. And the forehand is honestly just not really reliable enough for me to consider it elite. It betrays him too often. It is so common in a Shelton match where he's hitting effective serves that are then spoiled by +1 forehand errors. So I really think that Shelton's most important improvement areas are no longer his weaknesses. I think that it is the forehand. In Toronto, when he played the best I've ever seen him play, his forehand wasn't missing that week, ever. So here's kind of my thesis. I think Shelton's going to improve his win rate next year. I think he's going to get more consistent, but I think he probably doesn't win a 1,000. He might not rack up quite as many points at the majors. And ultimately, I feel like 2027 is going to be Shelton's breakthrough year. When I evaluate him as a player, I feel as if he still needs some time. The thing with Shelton is people expect a lot out of him next year because he's already accomplished a lot. But to me, he's overachieved early, and he's actually a late bloomer, which is hard to see right now because he's had so many splashy results. But ultimately, I feel as if what he does in 2026 is not going to be a reflection on what he is going to do long term. I think he will far exceed his 2026 level at a future date. I really do think that he's not considered a late bloomer right now. I think when it's all said and done, we'll realize that Shelton needed a lot of time to kind of come into his own and realize the full capacity of his potential. At number 7, it is Novak Djokovic. I don't feel as if I need to endorse his current skill level, but maybe I do. I think his forehand is probably the 3rd best in the world right now. I think his backhand is the 2nd or 3rd best backhand in the world right now. His serve has reached a point where I think it's a top 15 best serve in the world right now. All that said, if he can get in really good shape, he can finish 2026 3 in the world. If he can get his body up for it, that's the potential here. But when a 38-year-old shows physical decline in back-to-back years, you kind of have to take it for what it is. You also have to acknowledge that the schedule he plays leaves him no margin for error in the rankings. Famously, last year, he made the semifinals at all 4 majors he played. That's what it's going to take for him to maintain a top 5 ranking playing the schedule that he's playing. And that feels really difficult to do. A continued physical decline, a worsening physical state is a real possibility. I'm not necessarily predicting that. Otherwise, I'd have him lower than 7, but it is a possibility. Last year, I did underpredict him, but this year, 7 feels about right for me. Moving on to number 6, that's where we'll find Alexander Zverev. I did see some concerning signs in 2025 for Zverev. His body started to break down last year. There were a lot of issues that were popping up here and there. Shoulder, back, sometimes where it just seemed like he wasn't really up for it mentally like he usually is. This is year 12 or 13 on the tour for Zverev. The only way he can play is an ultra physical style. And I also think last year he lost a little bit of speed and defense. I looked at the analytics. I wanted to see if Steel Score reflected that observation, and it does. I'm going to skip 2023, which was his comeback year. He spent a lot of 2023 still kind of building up his movement after the catastrophic ankle injury that came at Roland Garros in 2022. So in 2022, his Steel Score was 35%. In 2024, it was 36%. In 2025, it was 33%. So it goes down 2/3 percentage points from where it was in Zverev's, recent regular years without injuries. And Steel Score is a number. It doesn't fluctuate from it only really fluctuates in between, I want to say 15 percentage points. So every percentage point is kind of significant. I said that last year there were some concerning signs for Zverev, but it still should be acknowledged that he finished world number 3. I think the reason why Sasha was so frustrated all year long, and furthermore, the reason why it felt as if Zverev wasn't having a successful season, is because the quality wins weren't there. He went 0-5 against Alcaraz last year. He's on a horrible streak against Fritz. He lost 2 big matches down the stretch against Felix at the US Open and the ATP Finals. And then if you look at the top 20 number, Zverev's record against top 20 players post-Australian Open last year, 9-14. So these are sort of the kinds of things I'm tracking right now with Zverev. And I think there's a real risk that if he doesn't find his game in the first half of 2026, he can start to feel discouraged. Things can slip even further. Now, time to acknowledge that this was a very negative analysis of Zverev moving into next year, but I have him at 6 in the world. What's up with that? What's up with that is, and he showed this last year, he still beats a lot of players even if he's playing by prime Zverev standards, his C game, he still beats a lot of players because there are certain things that are built into his game. The first serve, the consistency off the ground, the ability to grind players down, the ability to sort of just out physical, out solid, and sort of clog up all the holes in a baseline rally. That just beats so many guys, especially if you're underpowered against him. His floor still feels really high to me. And that's why, even if I'm like, man, I don't think Zverev's going to be the same next year, that's still 6th in the world to me. Moving on to the top 5. At 5 in the world, Taylor Fritz. Now, I started the show saying that I'm not going to drastically change my opinions on players based on the first week of the season. It's never really going to happen. If there's one thing that has been concerning in the first week, it's probably been Taylor Fritz and seeing that. Look, he doesn't look injured in the matches, by the way. He looks like a guy who couldn't really have much of an offseason because he was focused on getting his knee healthy. The fact is, knee tendonitis is very difficult to get rid of. It's not impossible to play through, but it is impossible to play well through it. And it just sounds like he didn't have a great offseason, and I think that could catch up with him. His points are backloaded, so his seeding won't slip too badly, even if he has a bad first half of the year. But ultimately, I still think Fritz is going to have a solid year. Despite what's been kind of a concerning first week, especially with the news of the knee tendonitis, which I think is beyond whatever the results have been. I want to read Fritz's win rates in the last 4 years. 69, 69, 70 and a half, 69. And I hope everyone was mature enough to receive that stat. Why has he been so consistent? He's really good at bringing it mentally every week. Even at 250s and 500s, he's going to show up. And he does everything other than defend and finish forward at a top 10 level. It's a dependable and precise backhand. It's a upper echelon forehand. It's an elite serve. It's a really underrated return of serve, even if he doesn't win as many return points because of the defensive capabilities. The return itself is still excellent. And you combine that with somebody who competes really, really well. And you get a consistent player who's going to win a ton of matches year in and year out. My concern would be the body breaking down a bit because he's played so much, because he's played through a lot of injuries. Last 2 years, he's finished 5th and 3rd in total matches played. So you definitely have that concern that Fritz's body is going to break down. The other concern is that it doesn't really feel like there's improvement that will be easy to access. I told Gruskin on the offseason question show that the 2 areas I think he could improve would be transition game and fearlessness under pressure. And let me just say, those things are going to be really hard to improve. I'm not necessarily projecting some massive improvements in those areas. It would be great. It's what we saw in the quasi-exhibition setting at Laver Cup when he beat Alcaraz. But it's not going to be easy for Taylor to execute those things consistently. So for now, I'm just going to kind of hold Taylor in position, is basically what I'm doing. I'm holding him in position because I don't see any signs that things are going to change significantly for Taylor Fritz for better or worse. Moving on to number 4. This is where we find Jack Draper. Let's address the health stuff first and foremost, because that is, of course, going to be dictating where everybody stands on Jack. He is missing the Australian Open. He is going to be taking a 0 on his rankings for that. You may think it's absurd to predict a guy year-end number 4 if he's going to miss one of the 4 majors. It's not absurd. Case in point, Felix. Look at Felix. How many matches did he win? Australian Open, Roland Garros, Wimbledon combined. Last year. Combined. 2 matches. Big results go a long way. It does not take a player long if that player has the ability to rack up a couple of titles, especially a 1000, get to the tail end of a major, which Jack has already done. It does not take a long time to make up those points and surge up the rankings. Big results go a long way. It's not about being healthy and, trickling on points throughout the year necessarily. It can be about that, but when you're as good as Draper, when you have that high-end potential, it really doesn't concern me that he misses the Australian Open. And I am taking health into account. I am. Because, full disclosure, I had him at number 5 before I started getting concerned about Fritz's body. So initially I said, I wanted to pick Draper 3 in the world. I wanted him to be 3 in the world. That's where I think he belongs based on just talent level alone, skill set alone. So I docked him down 2. Fritz, there are some concerns with Taylor's body and Taylor's health. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go Draper 4, Fritz 5. But I am docking points because of the health thing. Just not that many. Because I still see Draper as somebody who is exceptionally well-rounded. He plays offense, defense, and neutral, all at a top 10 level. Can use his serve as an elite weapon, his forehand as an elite weapon. His backhand has elite consistency. He can keep the ball in play with the best of them. He is a tough competitor. His movement gives him the ability to hang in rallies with anybody. But he can play first strike tennis as well. He can finish at the net. Like, he just checks every single box. And he has enough firepower. I just don't see a world, unless there's another health disaster like there was last year. You could say, I think there will be. Look, it's not as if Draper has never had a healthy season. He's had 2. So that's something. Maybe the arm thing is going to be a long-term issue. And then if that's the case, then this prediction will probably be wrong. But I'm going to go best case scenario for Jack, that he misses the Australian Open. He works his way back, and then from there, he has at least a moderately healthy season where he's able to rack up the big results that he's capable of. Moving on to number 3. 3 is an interesting one this year, isn't it? So many different opinions on who will finish 3 in the world. I'm going with Lorenzo Musetti. Now, first off, I really do like his current coaching situation, which I talked to him about on the channel, which you should check out if you haven't yet. In Simone Tartarini, he has someone who he fully trusts on a personal level, a father figure, somebody who knows him extremely well and supports him in every single aspect of life on tour. But now you bring in Jose Perlas, you incorporate some outside counsel for some new ideas. So that's the first thing. I really like what he did with the coaching. I also see him on an upward trajectory in so many areas. He has matured as a competitor. He keeps getting more and more physical. He keeps adding technical firepower. And this is important because he has to play in order to really sustain himself in the top 5. He needs to play a little bit less defense. And he needs to do that for both attritional reasons and effectiveness reasons. And to do that, of course, he needs to have a mentality of, I'm going to take the opportunities to be aggressive, and I'm going to be willing to use my court position and flatten the ball out and inject pace and have that mentality of recognizing when there are chances to get on the front foot and play offense. And he's definitely started to do that. But also on a technical level, serve needed to get better. Forehand needed to get better. And, he served really well last fall. And where did he finish in forehand quality last year? Probably an improvement that was as underlooked as any across the tour. Lorenzo Musetti finished 4th in forehand quality. And maybe it's not because he was just, bombing winners left and right. But you talk about a forehand that's become really reliable and can apply pressure as well. Musetti, he's got it now. I think he'll do more of the same on clay, where he was clearly the 3rd best player in the world in 2025 on clay. I assume injury isn't going to kill his grass court season like it did last year, and I'm confident he's going to have the best hard court season of his career. So 3 in the world, most interesting prediction there is going into this season. Musetti's my guy. Okay, moving on to world number 2, with the top 2 being quite obvious. My prediction for 2 in the world is Carlos Alcaraz. Let's start with the coaching change conversation. Carlos played a lot of his best tennis last year with Samu Lopez in his box. Samu Lopez is clearly a terrific technical mind, responsible for so many of the outstanding adjustments that Carlos has made in the last couple of years. He certainly filled a need on the team as well that was very necessary to keep things fun and light, which is something that Carlos responds well to. But that doesn't change the fact that the departure of Juan Carlos Ferrero is a seismic change for Alcaraz mentally. It, of course, begs the question, is Carlos going to be able to keep up the same work rate? The split in terms of just overall drama and distraction seemed to just be a little bit messier than what you would want. And the fact is, there's some instability there. And there's none with Sinner. And the 1% is what we're talking about here. Because I don't think Alcaraz needs Ferrero to be great. In fact, I know he doesn't. That's not even something I need to say I think for. I know Alcaraz can be great without Ferrero. But we're talking about an arms race here where 1%, 2% is going to mean everything. And on the margins, I don't love how this has all went down for Carlos. Not really. I don't think this is necessarily a positive development. Maybe long-term it will prove to be. But I think this is something that Carlos will have to overcome and will eventually overcome. I don't see it as a good thing, though. Now, the other perspective that I have here is 2025 was an incredible year of improvement for Alcaraz. A smoother service motion, a more compact, less rushable technique, better risk management in his shot selection, more consistent focus in his matches, more consistent mentality week to week, didn't experience the burnout that we've seen in previous years, responded to adversity a little bit better than what we'd seen in previous years. So many things got better for Alcaraz. I thought it was a marvelous accomplishment overall. But maintaining that level plus adding to that level is not going to be an easy task. And despite all of what I just said, Sinner was right on Alcaraz's heels despite playing 3 fewer months of tennis. So that's kind of what I'm looking at here. And that's given me the feeling that Jannik probably pulls ahead next year. Not by a lot, but if I'm picking it, one or the other, I'm going Jannik based on all of those factors. Now, I do want to talk about Sinner, who is my prediction for year-end number 1 in 2026. One of the most impressive things about the last 2 years and change has been Jannik's stability and his mental consistency. No matter what has changed in his life, which has been a lot. I mean, let's face it, a lot has changed. The only constant is his level of performance. The serve improvement last fall for Jannik is something that I want to shout out. It was really striking. Don't let one set erase that. It's easy to let one set erase that. I don't think that's right. The serve was miles better than it's ever been before, right on the heels of a technical change. That's meaningful. That's something to build on for next year. Last year was also Sinner's most consistent and most impressive physically speaking. And that's an area that is in a way aided by having 3 months off. But, that's an area that Sinner's had to work really hard on. And I think as he moves into his mid-20s now, we are going to see the very best version of Jannik Sinner physically. His variation is going to continue to get a little better, little by little. I don't expect any sudden, Sinner is an elite volleyer now. I don't expect it to be like that. But on the margins, he's going to keep getting better. Why? Because he's working incredibly hard at it, and he'll chip away at those skills. As for the Alcaraz head-to-head, that's the biggest thing that would give somebody pause. and say, can Sinner really finish above Alcaraz? Because in order to do so, he probably needs to beat Carlos in some major finals. He probably needs to do that in order to finish number one. And this is where we have to make like a real distinction between talking about the past and looking ahead to the future. Because when you're talking about the past, I'm not really into doing all the mental, I'll analyze it, obviously, but I'm not really interested in examining what the 7-2 head-to-head in the last 2 years, like what that really means, other than the fact that it's 7-2 head-to-head in the last 2 years. Each match has its own reasons, context, circumstances, and I'm happy to explore those things if that were the activity. The activity is not that. The activity is to look forward, look into the future, and the fact is I am not seeing anything in the head-to-head that makes me feel as if Jannik Sinner cannot begin to even it out more. He needed that ATP Finals win, and he got it. He needed the Wimbledon win, and he got it. He's still playing catch-up. There's no doubt about it. But I think the efforts to be to be braver in big moments after the Roland Garros match, that was sort of the come to the senses takeaway for Jannik after that match, is he needs to be braver in big moments. He's executed that. I still think that his serving performance is going to be better moving forward in the head-to-head. And I think it's going to start to even out a little bit. That's what I would project based on what I've seen. All right? It's going to be an exciting year. I think there's going to be a lot of movement. We will revisit this at a later date. Will this be the first year I embarrass myself completely? Or will it be another year of a satisfactory top 10 prediction? There's only one way to find out. It should be a glorious season. What's coming up as far as programming is concerned? Monday match analysis, first of the year. That's coming up. And then we'll do our Australian Open preview show. And then we'll do a mailbag right before the Australian Open begins, or right after the first round, one or the other. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.